Shalom, everyone. It is March the 15th. This week is Parashat Vayikra, and we are entering in a new book. This book, Vayikra, I'm just going to spotlight myself here. Vayikra is a very different book from all the other books. Vayikra has no movement, has very few stories, is by all accounts a book that deals with the rules pertaining to the Levites, the Kohanim. It's the sacrifices, it's the core, it's the hardcore of the Torah. It's the holiness code at the center of the Torah, be a blessing, be holy, chapter 19, and blessings and curses at the end. It's a very, very complicated book. It's interesting that this is the book that traditionally was taught to children. The first book that was taught to children was Vayikra. Perhaps because it was so difficult, or because it is so focused on ritual and the life of ritual. We're not going to get past the first, 8 verses of this book today, because I wanted to approach in a way that it's consistent with the themes that we've been developing and consistent with the manner that I've been teaching since the beginning, which is to look deeply at these texts, to try and find other kinds of illustrations and applications of the text, and of course to open up certain kinds of curiosities. So with that, I'm going to just go, my sheet today has a lot of the, this is it. No, this is not it. Yes, it is. Okay. We are talking about leaning in, examining v'samach, okay? When you'll see the verse is that you have to place a hand on the animal. And you can't get much more granular than that in terms of what's going on in the sacrifice, in the first bit. So here is just an excerpt of an article from Dr. Yitzchak Feder, who specializes in Vayikra, blood rituals. He has a book called something about the Hittite blood rituals, right? You want to talk to a biblical scholar who knows his Hittite blood rituals, okay? He writes at the beginning in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way in this article, oh no, here it comes. It's that time of the year again. It's exactly how I feel when we get to Vayikra. When God calls out to Moses, Vayikra, heralding the beginning of Leviticus, many readers, especially those who are not anthropologically inclined, like most of us, are ready to tune out the ensuing litany of animal sacrifices, bodily emissions, incest laws, and other less than inspiring topics that occupy the Torah portions for several weeks. Indeed, Maimonides himself argued that these laws are relics from an early phase of Israel's civilization, confirming our suspicions. These rules are primitive. So part of what is going on when we read the book of Vayikra is that we're entering a world, and this world is different from us. And you will thank me for electing not to show the videos of sacrificial rites in Judaism and throughout the world. I did spend some time last night trying to look up if anybody has reproduced or replicated. And in fact, if you go online and go onto YouTube, you can see a demonstration of the Korban Pesach. There is a group that every year tries to put together the Korban Pesach. I'm not sure it's because it was just, gruesome, or because these people are, I guess, just a little extreme in their desire to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock and create a World War III by rebuilding the temple there. They really have no clue as to the geopolitical repercussions of what they want to do. But having said that, it does reenact in some way the sacrifice, the Passover sacrifice, which is different from the Olah sacrifice, which is what we're going to do here. And then you can look at other cultures. If you have a stomach for this, you can look at examples of sacrifices in other religions, and I guarantee you won't want to watch them. Which is, so you're welcome. Okay. Actions speak louder than words. The meaning of sacrifices and ritual. Go ahead, Marlene. Yeah, I'm sorry.
My question is, it starts out with Vayikra, and he called out, and usually we hear Vayomer,
Yeah.
El Moshe Lemor. And so I wondered, what's the difference? Was Moses not paying attention? Was he far away? Was this emphasis?
So there is a lovely set of interpretations on that very question. In fact, one of the compelling suggestions is put this in context of the end of the book of Shmot, which is the cloud is filling the sanctuary and he can't get in there. And so that is why God had to call from near the sanctuary, near the Ohel Moed, because the cloud was too thick. I read a beautiful sermon by Rabbi Sachs, a beautiful essay in his latest book, posthumously published. He reflects on the idea of vocation and the idea that to be called to something is to know what the purpose you're doing. And you know, in his beautiful style, he I think encapsulates one of the senses of that verse, which is that God is issuing a call to Moses and speaking to Moses from the cloud sanctuary, and that call ensues with the sacrificial instructions. That's what's going on. Okay. Perhaps here, more than other Torah texts, academic biblical studies are indispensable, offering to provide historical context and adds meaning to these obscure and archaic sources. So raw biblical studies. But what does it mean to speak of meaning in relation to ritual texts? In addition, in addressing this question, scholars of ritual studies have pointed out that rituals appeal to a more basic non-verbal level of expression in which the body takes the place of words as the instrument of expression. And this is really a critical point, which is that, and you've heard me say things like this from time to time, that the power of ritual begins where words really end, and words end pretty quickly. We affect with ritual things that we cannot convey with words, and take the most basic rituals that many of us have experienced, the ritual of Kiddush, which obviously includes words, but includes a ritual act, Havdalah, a ritual act, and on and on and on in the synagogue lexicon. Infants understand these signals. Putting on shoes means leaving the house long before they understand verbal language. And these bodily signals continue to convey important messages alongside speech into adulthood. So it's gesture and action and expression, sometimes facial expression, that conveys more in words. There's body language, right? For example, take romantic advice from an expert in mammalian communication, Gregory Bateson, points out that if a man says, "I love you" to a woman, she'll probably pay more attention to his body language and intonation than his words. Okay, so "I love you" is not only a statement, but it comes with the whole apparatus of physical gestures. The following remark by Ludwig Wittgenstein helps clarify how these observations relate to ritual practice. In magical healing, one indicates to an illness that it should leave the patient. After the description of any such magical cure, we'd like to add, if the illness doesn't understand that, then I don't know how one ought to say it. In other words, you want to say something to affect it, but it may not be sufficient. in this sense, ritual gestures are primitive, not in the sense of outdated or simplistic, but that they appeal to a more fundamental level of communication whose scope is much wider than verbal language. It is the more primal level of communication which offers a means for interacting with impersonal forces and states such as sin, guilt, and impurity. So I bolded that line because I think that that's really, that's one of the go-home takeaways from today, which is what I want to convey is that we're entering a world in which there is a lot of gesture and a lot of violent gesture, namely killing animals, blood, which is a symbol of many, many different meanings. And in the instance that we're going to describe here, the instance of the laying of hands. Sorry, and that is what is going to happen here. The laying of hands on the laying of a hand on the animal is going to make a very important symbolic statement. Okay. I want to just give you these two quotes here, and this is on a theme of details really matter, and examining details gives you the whole picture. Sandy Weil, Citigroup, details create the big picture. And here, George St. Pierre, when you pay attention to detail, the big picture will take care of itself. I find, in the kind of reading that I like to do now in different kinds of areas, when you pay attention to the granular detail of things, you tend to get the big picture. I want to say like a lahavdil of, gigantic proportions, but in no way, dissimilar. I read a lot from time to time, especially, leading up to Yom HaShoah, I read a lot about the Holocaust, and I find that testimonies of individuals, accounts of single individuals, are often much more gripping than large, treatments and historical analyses, because when you get into the nitty-gritty details, you understand and I can identify the story, the picture in a different way, and part of obviously the sense of involvement and empathy, if that's possible, is to connect to the world through the eyes of another person, through the details, the small details that are being spoken about. And that often makes for a much richer understanding of things, because it puts it at a level that many of us, may in fact come close to. I don't think we can ever relate to, but I think it's certainly something that we can identify in a context and come to that boundary in a different way, that boundary of understanding. So details matter, and I would say, in the area of temple or sanctuary ritual, when it is so far removed from us, and we simply do not use this vocabulary, when we begin to try and understand these rituals or these details, a picture does emerge. And that's my thesis here today, that from the detail of V'samach Yadav, he places his hand, or you get a certain picture. So here's the text, chapter 1, verse 1 to 9 of Leviticus, V'samach Yado, I'm sorry. The Lord called to Moses, as Marlene pointed out, Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Adonai elav me'ol moed lemor. God spoke to Moses, spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you presents an offering of cattle to the Lord, he shall choose his offering from the herd or from the flock. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall make his offering a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in his behalf before the Lord. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering. V'samach yado al rosh ha'olah. He shall lay his hand upon the head of, it should, rosh ha'olah, it's the intended burnt offering, hasn't been burnt yet, that it may be acceptable in his behalf, in expiation for him. The bull shall be slaughtered before the Lord, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall offer the blood, dashing the blood against all sides of the altar, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The burnt offering shall be flayed and cut up into sections. The sons of Aaron, the priest, shall put fire on the altar, and they lay out wood on the fire. And Aaron's sons, the priest, shall lay out the sections with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire on the altar. Its entrails and legs shall be washed with water, and the priest shall turn the whole onto smoke on the altar as a burnt offering, an offering by fire pleasing odors to the God. So I've already lost one of you. This
Did
is
God say, Rabbi, did
yes.
God say that it was a pleasing odor, or is that commentary?
No, the question as to what that actually means, reach nichoach, it really has stumped a lot of scholars and commentators, because obviously it really sounds like an anthropomorphic phrase. Does God really smell? No, God doesn't smell this at all. We have in the Torah vestiges of what is called linguistic fossils. Okay, I like that term because it helps at least satisfy this contradiction. The contradiction is we have an invisible God, a formless God with no form, but yet there are times where human attributes and language applies to God or is used to God, the eyes of God, etc. And these are really in the same order of, they're like fossils are to zoologists and biologists. They're remnants of previous times. Do we think that in previous religions prior to biblical Israel, they actually thought that they were feeding the gods? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
The purpose of sacrificial religion in pre-Israelite religion was to actually bring food to God and to tend to God. And of course, one of the ways that the Torah makes a complete distinction from that is, this leads to my next figure here, which is the sanctuary, which we talked about last time, but we have to remember, and I didn't put the schematic drawing of it, although it's lower here. Just I'm going to make this as large as possible. This is the sanctuary, the mobile sanctuary, and on the point of feeding God. Okay, so in the sanctuary, where does God, quote, reside? Well, God is over here in the Holy of Holies, as it were. In other words, the throne room where God is invisible is here, which is the singularity infinitesimal spot, which you can't even mark it. It's like it's the symbolic, epicenter of the divine revelation. It is so. It's like I compare this, in the way I try to describe it, is that the Big Bang. If you read a little cosmology, it's beautifully done in Danny Matt's book and in other books that describe this. The Big Bang starts with, a seed, but the seed is 1 to the something negative, 30 million, size. It is so minute. It's impossible. Of course, you can't see it with the human eye, and you can't even imagine it. But mathematicians have tried to, extrapolate from the age of the universe and the size, and how fast the universe is expanding, what this little tiny seed must have been. And then it has a moment of implosion and then explosion, all of which takes place within, hundreds and hundreds of millions and millions of seconds. Okay, I like to say that that's what's in the Holy of Holies. It's a spot from which you cannot. It's so beyond comprehension, and that's the invisible spot from which God radiates through the universe. The point is that it's in this half of the sanctuary, and what's going on in this half is the altar. If biblical Israel is about feeding God, then you'd bring this closer to this, but it's not. And in this diagram here, you can see I just don't have a straight line between the two halves. It's a rectangle with two squares. At the center of this square is the Holy of Holies, and at the center of this square is the altar. Okay, and so the drama going on here is the people speak to God with the altar, and God speaks to the people from the Holy of Holies. It's these 2 points here divided by this line. It's really the center of two squares. My point is that biblical Israel understands the world differently and has done as much as it could have to strip away the anthropomorphic and the magic from the whole story. There's no magic here. We can't handle magic. Magic assumes that there are different powers available. So that I go back to this the sanctuary again here, and boy, you should take 5 minutes and Google the tabernacle, and you'll find the tabernacleman.com there. This is big in Christianity for lots of Christological reasons, because Jesus becomes identified with sacrifice and with the tabernacle in a way that Judaism just kind of, we are not going there at all. And Christianity takes a lot of this, and so the depth to which Christianity focuses on this is quite significant. And so you have, dozens of animations and videos. I showed you some last week on this. Okay. So back to last week. This is the altar, and what is important to understand, that the altar is actually quite a large thing, and I have pictures of it here. We have a certain imagination of the altar from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They make an altar. So they take a few stones, they put the animal on a stone, but the altar of the tabernacle was quite a large thing. And I have somewhere the dimensions, but no, it didn't get photocopied here, photographed. The dimensions of the altar, it's big, okay? It's a large box, basically. And you put the animal inside it. The fire is underneath it, and you put the sections of the animal on a fire inside this big box. And I guess the priests were standing next to it, and they were stoking it next to it. Here's a picture of a priest, and they were doing all that they needed to do. Not being a big barbecuer, I can't tell you how much is involved. I know there are some people here that do more barbecue than I used to do, but barbecuing and doing it nicely, getting a good sizzle on a piece of meat is takes some time. Doesn't take a lot of time. You have to cut the meat up. For the burnt offering, these offerings were not consumed at all. They were totally burnt. Okay.
Rabbi, can I say something? Can you
Go ahead, please.
Picture? Keep the picture. Come down. Go to the right.
To the right.
Down a little. Now up the bottom picture, right there.
This, the brazen?
One with the animal on it.
This
So
one?
the altar was hollow.
Yes.
It was copper and hollow, and so they could
Right.
carry it. It was not heavy. But when they set it up, they put earth in and rocks in the middle of the altar.
Okay.
And they filled it all the way to the top. And then they burned on top of that. And the fire, according to what I read, really didn't affect the copper. It was centralized in the middle.
All useful data. I mean, for us to understand this, I mean, as I said, I relate to this with your outdoor barbecue, and this is quite a large barbecue, but it's you gotta really spend a lot of time cleaning it and maintaining it, and
Yes.
I mean that's a big job. Okay, back
And
to the text.
it was about 20 by 20 feet.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
Tall, and it was 5 feet high.
All right. So I'm going to go back to the text here. You brought your offering. It was a big cattle, a big cow or an ox, and you placed your hand on the head of the offering. So the question then is, what's going on here? Okay. And I want to say, I'm really, really trying hard to squeeze as much story out of this as possible. And I'm really asking, what's the story here? What's the deal with the putting of the hand? Okay. Why is he putting the hand on the animal? Okay. If we were together in a classroom, I'd ask you all to give me your thoughts. But since even to ask you to volunteer for that will take too much time and also put you all on the spot. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you to think about what you think is the reason for placing the hands on. Okay, as we just dial through these once again, these little pictures. And I'm sparing you from the tabernacleman.com, where you can buy a life-size model of the tabernacle for $40,000, which is hysterical. And here we go. So what are the possible interpretations of the Samach Yado? Transfer of sin. I have heard this, and I would be remiss if I didn't think that sometimes I thought this way, but you'll see in a moment, why we reject this. Transfers sin or guilt to the animal. That is, the thinking is you put your hand on the animal to put something of you on the animal, okay? So I am sending my sin, I got my hand here, and I'm, here, sin is here in my heart, and I'm going and placing it like a conductor, my hand, my arm and hand functions as a conduction for sin. Okay, so the story is I am a sinner, and I am transferring my sin to the animal, and I am allowing my animal to be burned. Therefore, my sin will be distributed and destroyed. Okay. So the animal, which now bears the sin or guilt, is then put to death. Transfer of personality. The animal becomes a substitute for the offer. The sacrifice is a substitution. It suffers death in place of the offer. In other words, I am identifying the animal with me. And I'm making a very profound, what I would think is a profound statement, which is, I can't sacrifice myself, so I'm going to sacrifice the animal instead. Now, we have some of that idea in the Amidah, okay? The Amidah functions where an animal is substituted for a human being. Now, you want to talk about primitive, that's really going to the core of the primitive religious experience. And it's not an accident that this is Abraham. Abraham is, coming hundreds of years before the issuance of these laws. So Abraham is engaged in sacrifice, but Abraham has already had a couple of altar moments. And now when God says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, the one you love, Isaac, and he understands that Yitzchak is to be an olah. And so what he is doing there is in my reading of this, following certain interpreters, he's avoiding until the very, very last moment when he sees a ram and he defies God by taking the ram as a substitute. It's a different kind of reading, but I think it's very compelling on some level. Yes, Marlene.
What about the goat that goes to Azazel, to hell?
We'll get to the goat. Okay, I'm glad you mentioned it, because in that moment there is the placing of two hands on the goat. This is the placing of one hand. One hand is not two hands. And that's really important. I'm telling you, we're really at the. I have to find the best way to make the story here. Okay, all of these things are part of it, and we'll get to some even things that are going to shock you. Okay, so extension of self, that we're saying this is a gift to God. The act designates this as a gift, or number 5, the act that demonstrates ownership in either material or ritual sense. So the scholar that I read on the subject, his name is Professor Wright, he says it's ownership. We don't have this idea in Judaism of transfer, okay? And we certainly don't have this idea of substitution. Notwithstanding what Abraham does with Isaac, okay? Abraham takes the thing, tachat beno, yes, because he wants to make an olah that makes sense. He wants to it is so abhorrent to him to sacrifice a human being. He will take this, and it will be, the olah that is required of him. Okay. I mean, the Bible is anti-magic, so we do not expect any hint of magical thinking or gestures. If this were the case, then this gesture would be found in all sacrifices, especially those that have to do with sin. But we do not find it when the sin offering is a bird. In other words, you don't, when the guy has to brings a bird as a sin offering to expiate for his sin, there's no ceremony where he puts his hand on the bird. Okay, so this scholar is saying, look, it doesn't make sense. If it's about transferring sin, then any time you have a sin offering, you would think that you put your hand on it, but that ritual is not required. If the animal were being put to death for the offer, the slaughter would be the high point of the sacrifice. In other words, there's a logic here, right? If you are saying that the animal represents me, and the animal goes to its death in lieu of me, which is kind of what we say at the Kapporis, which we'll talk about that, at the end here. Then what you're saying is that the slaughter is the high point, but clearly the slaughter is not the high point. The slaughter is only an instrumentality for placing the blood on the altar. The blood is the high point, not the death. Okay, and that is really, once we're looking at it under a magnifying glass, then every single ritual counts, every single moment counts. The slaughter really is a function. The slaughter is a function. The slaughter, as dramatic as it is, and it is dramatic, especially for those of us who don't see this every day, for the priests and for the people who brought the offerings and who were engaged in this all the time, it wasn't dramatic at all. It was the blood on the altar that was dramatic. Okay. Next, nothing is said. It's a silent gesture because the sanctuary is a place of silence. This is a huge, huge idea. We won't get into it today, but we'll probably get into it another time. that the sanctuary is a sanctuary of silence. That the place which I showed you in the pictures, that's an island of silence within a cacophony of sound. The sanctuary, which has the role only for the Kohanim. Only the Kohanim go in there. It's all quiet. There's nothing said except for one or two times. You know, there's one time where it's on the scapegoat, and another time where the Kohen Gadol pronounces God's name. That's it. If there was talking in the sanctuary, you would almost expect to find psalms that were given in the name of the Kohanim, but you have B'nai Levi always cited in the Psalms. So the picture that's emerging of the temple and the sanctuary rituals was, and I like this phrase very much, the sanctuary and the temple, the inside, precincts of the temple is an island of silence. The outside, namely the courtyard and the assembly point, that's busy places. There's singing, there's music, there's dancing, there's lots of things going on, right? So, and the real intense of that is that Judaism built itself on out of the fusion of that sanctuary of silence and the courtyard of noise, okay? And according to Yisrael Noel, a very important Bible scholar, he says as follows, and this for me gives me a little bit of goosebumps. He says, how is that reflected in Judaism to this day? Do you know how it's reflected in Judaism today? What is the highest moment of Jewish worship?
Silent Amidah.
The silent Amidah. And where is it located? The silent Amidah is at the core of Jewish worship. And everything around it is music, noise, davening, mumbling, etc. But it's you say the Amidah you really have to say it, and we all make this mistake from time to time. You have to say it in total silence. I mean, it's easy now for me today because I have the mute button, so I can do it every day, right? But I mean, it's, you can't do that in real life. That's going to be one of the readjustments, okay?
We have choreography with our feet during the Amidah.
Also,
there's no hand motions.
Also very important. The moment of the Amidah, it really is a reenactment, a recreation of the temple. It's such a brilliant idea that you would never think about, that you in your davening are representing the Beit HaMikdash, because at that moment you are the silent core, and then around that moment is the music and the noise of the people. So he's saying, look, in placing your hand on the animal's head, the offerer attests that this victim is his indeed, that the sacrifice which is about to be presented by the priest is offered in his offerer's name, and that the benefits accruing from it will return to him. In other words, he's saying, not this is me, but this is mine. And there is a remarkable difference between this is me and this is mine. And you could almost feel the difference religiously in that statement. If I were to say that the animal represents me, I have a different religious experience, which I think borders into areas which I'm uncomfortable with, because I want to live. I don't want to have symbolic death. The closest that we all get to symbolic death is on a community level in the Yom Kippur fast. Okay, but even that, let's be honest, it's not. We have the imagery, we have some of the language, but it's not. But here, it's the animal actually gets killed in front of you. And while that exposes you to a real picture of power, I almost want to say do you want to have that kind of trauma on a regular basis if you are making that sacrifice? I don't think so. And where does it lead to in the spiritual terms? I don't really know. But I want to say that there's something refreshing, if you can, about this, and very human about this, which is saying, I am giving up something that is mine. I'm not giving something that is me. Of course, I'm connected to it, but it's differentiated from me. That's very, very important. Okay? Well, we have different examples of placing hands in the Torah and in other things. So the Levites in the book of Numbers, so this is when you place when the people place their hands on the Levites, what were they saying? They're saying, you're mine, you're mine, you belong to me, you belong to the Klal Yisrael, and we are designating you in a formal designation as belonging to us. Now you mentioned the Atonement Ritual, which comes in chapter 16. V'samach Aharon et shtei yadav al rosh ha'sa'ir. What is he doing in that moment? Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and transgressions of the Israelites. V'yitvada alav et kol avonot bnei Yisrael et kol pisheim v'chol chatatam. V'natan otam al rosh ha'sa'ir v'shilach biyad ishi tiyeh mibara. And so what does he do? He puts them on the head of the goat, and it shall be sent off to the wilderness through a designated man. You may say here that this is transfer, but so I'm going to do the Talmudic thing here and say I'm going to really split a hair. In order to transfer sins from Aaron to the goat, the people had to transfer the sins to Aaron. If we're really being a stickler about conducting your sins and being like the the conduction here, then he had to absorb it from the people. He doesn't do that. That's magic. But what he does is he says he is designating. He's sticking his hands. He's saying, "You are the goat, and the sins of Israel. I am saying this. I confess the transgressions of the people." And that is the place now where they reside. I'm not transferring them, I'm placing them. We understand that this could be a stickler, okay? Placement of sins is not transfer in the strict sense. The sins are not passed through him to the goat. Aaron never carries these evils. Consequently, one cannot say that they are transferred. Rather, the placement of the sins is effected by both the hand placement gesture, which designates where the sins are to rest, and the spoken confession, which concretizes the sins, which then fall on the head of the goat. In other words, he says them, and we know that by saying them, you make them into a concrete reality, because what words do is make things real. By saying them, by placing hands, he is doing the symbolic gesture of placing them and not transferring them. And then the sins rest on the goat. The goat goes to Azazel. Now, I would say, as someone who sees in this certainly something primitive in the sense that we saw in the first paragraph there, primitive as something original. This is not. We don't do this. Okay. Look, there are some people who do the kaporas ritual. And that ritual is roundly criticized within certain circles in Judaism. It just so happens that it's popular because it's just so visceral. People like that. People like to have tangible, concrete things, okay? Here's another case, the blasphemer in Leviticus. There came out among the Israelites one whose mother was Israelite and whose father was Egyptian. And a fight broke out in the camp between the half Israelite and a certain Israelite. The son of the Israelite woman pronounced the name in blasphemy, and he was brought to Moses. Now his mother's name was Shlomi, son of Dibri, and son of tribe of Dan. And he was placed in custody until the decision of the Lord should be made to clear to them. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the blasphemer outside the camp and let all who were within hearing lay their hands upon his head and let the whole community stone him. Okay? The people who heard are that they put their hands on. Okay? The people who heard are not transferring anything, they are designating, and they are making a legal definition at that moment. So the Israelite people speak thus: anyone who blasphemes his God shall bear his guilt. If he pronounces the name of the Lord, he shall be put to death. The whole community shall stone him, stranger or citizen, if he has pronounced the name. They are not getting rid of pollution, which is somehow the way that this is understood. What they're doing there is a legal act. The placement has legal significance. The witnesses are designated the blasphemer as guilty of the crime and worthy of death. By it, the witnesses symbolically confirm their testimony to the community and also acknowledge their responsibility in the death of the criminal. In other words, what they're doing there is they're doing it's not a ritual, it's like a court procedure. It's a legal procedure. Ilana?
כל ישראל ערבים זה בזה also.
Yes.
They may be, we are responsible. We have to, if we know about something that is wrong, we have to stop it and be responsible. So by doing this, we're showing.
Absolutely. But what you have here are the people that heard this. So it's not their fault that they were in the earshot of the person who used God's name wrongly. But they now, unfortunately, have this responsibility. And it's a double-edged sword because they have the responsibility to put their hands as witnesses, and their witnessing makes them liable if they are wrong, right? And here in this case, here in the next case, this is what you paid for, this story here, okay? You have never heard this story before. It's in the Apocrypha. It's in the book of Susanna. There's a reason why it's not in the Bible. It's included in the Christian Apocrypha, and it's called Additions to Daniel. It's called the book of Susanna. I'm going to read the whole story for you. It's a little bit of, it's going to take a couple of minutes. It's only 50 verses or so. And if you want to know about Me Too and sexual harassment, you really never needed to go further than the Bible. There was a man living in Babylon whose name was Joachim. He married the daughter of Hilkiah named Susanna, a very beautiful woman and one who feared the Lord. Her parents were righteous and had trained their daughter according to the law of Moses. Joachim was very rich and had a fine garden adjoining his house. The Jews used to come to him because he was the most honored of them all. That year, 2 elders from the people were appointed as judges. Concerning them, the Lord had said, wickedness came forth from Babylon, from elders who were judges, who were supposed to govern the people. These men were frequently at Joachim's house, and all who had a case to be tried came to them there. When the people left at noon, Susanna would go into her husband's garden to walk. Every day, the 2 elders used to see her, going in and walking about, and they began to lust for her. They suppressed their consciences and turned away their eyes from looking to heaven or remembering their duty to administer justice. Both were overwhelmed with passion for her, but they did not tell each other of their distress, for they were ashamed to disclose their lustful desire to seduce her. Day after day, they watched eagerly to see her. One day they said to each other, let's go home, for it's time for lunch. So they both left and parted from each other. Returning back, they met again. And when each pressed the other for the reason, they confessed their lust. And together, they arranged for a time when they could find her alone. Once, while they were watching for an opportune day, she went in as before with only 2 maids and wished to bathe in the garden, for it was a hot day. No one was there except the 2 elders who had hidden themselves and were watching her. She said to her maids, bring me olive oil and ointments, and shut the garden doors so that I can bathe. They did as she told them. They shut the doors of the garden and went out by the side doors to bring what they had been commanded. They did not see the elders because they were hiding. When the maids had gone out, the two elders had got up and ran to her. They said, look, the garden doors are shut and no one can see us. We are burning with desire for you, so give your consent and lie with us. If you refuse, we will testify against you that a young man was with you, and this was why you sent your maids away. Susanna groaned and said, I am completely trapped, for if I do this, it will mean death for me. If I do not, I cannot escape your hands. I choose not to do it. I will fall into your hands rather than sin in the sight of the Lord. Then Susanna cried out with a loud voice, and the two elders shouted against her. And one of them ran and opened the garden doors. When the people in the house heard the shouting in the garden, they rushed in at the side door to see what had happened to her. And when the elders told their story, the servants felt very much ashamed, for nothing like this had ever been said about Susanna. The next day, when the people gathered at the house for her husband Joachim, the two elders came, full of their wicked plot to have Susanna put to death. In the presence of the people, they said, send for Susanna, daughter of Hilkiah, the wife of Joachim. So they sent for her, and she came with her parents, her children, and all her relatives. Now Susanna was a woman of great refinement and beautiful in appearance. As she was veiled, the scoundrels ordered her to be unveiled, so that they might feast their eyes on her beauty. Those who were with her and all who saw her were weeping. Then the two elders stood up before the people and laid their hands on her head. Through her tears, she looked up to heaven. For her heart trusted in the Lord. The elders said, while we were walking in the garden alone, this woman came in with two maids, shut the garden doors, and dismissed the maids. Then a young man who was hiding there came to her and lay with her. We were in a corner of the garden, and when we saw this wickedness, we ran to them. Although we saw them embracing, we could not hold the man because he was stronger than we, and he opened the doors and got away. We did, however, seize this woman and asked who the young man was, but she would not tell us. These things we testify. Because they were elders of the people and judges, the assembly believed them and condemned her to death. Then Susanna cried out with a loud voice and said, "O eternal God, you know what is secret and are aware of all things before they come to be. You know that these men have given false evidence against me, and now I am to die, though I have done none of the wicked things that they have charged against me." The Lord heard her cry. Just as she was being led off to execution, God stirred up the Holy Spirit of a young lad named Daniel, and he shouted with a loud voice, "I want no part in shedding this woman's blood." All the people turned to him and asked, "What is it you are saying?" Taking his stand among them, he said, "Are you such fools, O Israelites, as to condemn a daughter of Israel without examination and without learning the facts? Return to court, for these men have given false evidence against her." So all the people hurried back, and the rest of the elders said to him, "Come, sit among us and inform us, for God has given you the standing of an elder." Daniel said to them, "Separate them from each other, and I will examine them." When they were separated from each other, he summoned one of them and said to him, "You old relic of wicked days, your sins have now come home, which you have committed in the past, pronouncing unjust judgments, condemning the innocent and acquitting the guilty, though the Lord said, 'You shall not put an innocent and righteous person to death.' Now then, if you really saw this woman, tell me this. Under what kind of tree did you see them being intimate with each other?" He answered, "Under a mastic tree." And Daniel said, "Very well, this lie has cost you your head, for the angel of God has received the sentence from God and will immediately cut you in two." Then putting him to one side, he ordered them to bring the other. And he said to him, "You offspring of Canaan and not of Judah, beauty has beguiled you and lust has perverted your heart. This is how you have been treating the daughters of Israel, and they were intimate with you through fear. But the daughter of Judah would not tolerate your wickedness. Now then, tell me, under what kind of tree did you catch them being intimate with each other?" He answered, "Under an evergreen oak." Daniel said to him, "Very well, this lie has cost you also your head, for the angel of God is waiting with his sword to split you in two so as to destroy you both." Then the whole assembly raised a great shout and blessed God, who saves those who hope in him. And they took action against the two elders because out of their own mouths Daniel had convicted them of bearing false witness. they did to them as they had wickedly planned to do to their neighbor. Acting in accordance with the law of Moses, they put them to death. Thus innocent blood was spared that day. Hilkiah and his wife praised God for their daughter Susanna, and so did her husband Joachim and all her relatives, because she was found innocent of a shameful deed. And from that day onward, Daniel had a great reputation among the people. So I have to stop and put you all here. This is such an amazing story, and there's of course a reason why it's not in the Tanakh. It just has, you know, a little too much going on there, that it doesn't meet the standards, and it's probably, you know, probably came later, etc. But I mean, the point is, it's such a vivid illustration of conspiracy, of sexual assault in you know, the most extreme kind of way, except for the fact that she was brave enough to yell and scream, and thankfully people heard her. And although victimized and most likely traumatized from the event, emerges as a heroine because she did not you know, become corrupted as they had wanted her to be, and she herself was pious. But the point that I'm trying to make is back in the highlighted line, is that when they wanted to convict her, they stood up before the people and laid their hands on her head. They performed a legal act on her to designate her as the perpetrator. Okay, and that must have meant that this act, the act of placing hands, was assumed to be understood by all who saw it, in the way that you know, lowering the flag to half-mast is probably universally understood. I mean, you know, maybe children who have never seen it before don't know, but it's a universally recognizable symbol of a national state or a local state of mourning. Okay, so and we have those kinds of things that they're incidental details that have profound narrative to them, but outside of the, I mean, you know, frankly, the story is much more interesting than the fact that they placed their hands on him. You know, I would teach the story not because, you know, of this moment, because it's a case in study of sexual assault and the corruption of certain individuals who are assumed to have authority. I mean, this is, I don't want to make any allusions to anybody in power who has been, you know, accused of things, but here the people believe the conspirators, whereas, you know, the woman who proclaims her innocence is not believed. Now that itself, you know, is something that obviously says quite a bit. I know we're running over, but I just want to go to a couple of things to bring it closer. So we have Joshua, Moses and Joshua. Moses puts his hands on Joshua. You recall the text. Moses stands Joshua before the community and places his hands on him. Blessing and authority do not flow from the person Moses through his arms to Joshua. Rather, the imposition of hands serves to designate Joshua as the focus of the ritual action. The rite demonstrates who is to receive Moses' authority and glory. The rite understood this way demonstrates to the community before which the installation ceremony occurs that Joshua is Moses' legitimate successor. In this, it is like the rite in Leviticus 24, which designates the community who the guilty party is. In other words, when Moses is standing over Joshua and doing this, he's not transferring electricity to him. He's not transferring anything. He's just saying, here you are, Joshua, you belong to the people. And that's what ordination is supposed to be. Okay, so now I want to ask you the following questions. We can conclude with this. After studying this, you know, I've been saying for a long time, and I get the question all the time, you know, Rabbi, you know, when the Torah comes around, isn't it a little bit, you know, kind of idolatrous? Isn't it a bit, you know, should we be kissing the Torah? So from, you know, I've always said, you know, you can certainly construe that as reverence, and that is, a possibility. But the tzitzit are the identifying mark of the Jew. We saw that, in the book of Numbers. We also connect the tzitzit with the blue of the priestly garb. So when you place your tzitzit on the Torah, you are in effect signing on to the Torah. However, I want to add this layer of meaning to the placing of the hand on the Torah now in ways that I did not fully appreciate until studying this. And that is, when I touch the Torah, it's not an idolatrous act, and it's not only a reverential act, it's an ownership act.
Ownership.
I have thought about, the tzitzit as I'm signing on to the covenant, but I think another layer of meaning to this is,
Can I call you back?
I own this. I own this. This is my Torah. And of course, I cannot go around carrying the Torah because it's a big book, it's a big scroll, and it's expensive. And not everyone owns a Torah. And our Torahs are owned by the community and represent us. But I'm a shareholder. And touching the Torah is a way of demonstrating following these things. And there's no B'samach yado ala Torah verse, obviously, but I'm saying it's the symbolic language of I'm a shareholder. I have, and I say this sometimes to kids with their bar mitzvah, when you read a piece of the Torah, it's yours. It's yours. You own it. And you know what? That phrase, you own it, is part of the language that we speak. You break it, you own it. That's the pottery barn rule, right? But it's also, when you say you own it, right? It's like you own, it's yours. There's something about that which says it's mine, right? It's not me. I'm not making the Torah me, but I'm making it mine. Okay. I think there's something going on in circumcision. So in circumcision, the baby is taken now. You don't own a baby, right? But the simple act of holding the baby is not transferring anything to the baby. It's saying, you belong to me. And sometimes the moil will say, will ask you to hold the knife as he does the circumcision, okay? I think the motzi, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, well, could you construe a meaning out of this? I'm just putting a question mark here and all of that. But Decan, the ordination ceremonies of some rabbis, here we go. This is Rabbi Morty Schwartz is going to ordain someone here. This is seminary ordination. You should take a moment to look at the differences between all the different ordination ceremonies too. That itself is worth a whole lot.
Matthew Nathan Abelson.
Here's Matthew Abelson being
Presented
ordained.
by Rabbi Morty Schwartz.
Morty, we know Morty. Okay. So what is he doing here? He's taking a talus. All right, so the moment is that you get the title. That's the ordination moment, is you get the title. But the seminary created a unique tradition. I think, I'm guessing it's about 30 or 40 years old, because the photographs are around. I don't remember this earlier. And this is the ceremony. Here we go.
You are to be known as Rabbi Matt Abelson, a sage and a rabbi in Israel.
Morty places the thing on him, the talus, okay, and gives him a pat on the back.
Only one hand, not two.
That's one hand, not two. I'm going to ask Morty about that, because I am sure it occurs to him. Maybe we'll joke about it. The point is, we don't have this symbolism, because I think we naturally are averse to anything that is touchy-feely. and magical. I really think that the reason why we have stayed away from this is because it's just too much. I don't want to make any pejorative statements here, but when you go further to the left and further into liberal Judaism, Reform, Reconstructionist, and I mean, I couldn't believe this when I was doing the research for this talk today. There's an online rabbinical ordination mill. Why should I be surprised? And you can study for the rabbinate online, and they'll give you a smicha. I mean, oh my God, this is why people like me go crazy, okay? And so and the more liberal it gets, the more touchy-feely it gets. The more orthodox you get, the less touchy-feely it gets. Just go to a video of the why you chag smicha, and what are you going to find there? As you wouldn't be surprised, speeches, and more speeches, and then it's a graduation ceremony. There were 100 men. They go up the stage, they shake hands with all the rabbanim, and that's that. Maybe in private something happens, I don't know. The public ceremony is like a graduation ceremony of any university. And the reason I think is because they don't have anything to do with touchy-feely stuff. In Orthodoxy, forget it, okay? So that was Morty Schwartz. And just, I had to put this here for a second. Okay, so the leaning on, it's of course not like that, but lean on me is such a part of our culture, and then there's Sheryl Sandberg, which is to lean in. And what does she mean, by the way, when she says lean in? Of course, she suffered terrible tragic loss of her husband and all that stuff and wrote this book prior to that. What does she mean by women work and the will to lead? She is saying, I got to own it, basically. I got to own it, right? And so the samach is making it mine. And what's so fascinating to me is that within the context of the study of the Bible, we have a whole world here. This is one verse, one pair of words, okay? V'samach yado, and we just kind of flipped it off. We just kind of I mean, how many times have we read this and just kind of zip by it, right? And understand now that this comes out of a whole world that is so removed from us and was so deeply significant, and it was self-evident to people what this meant, and therefore, of course, it has that much more meaning to us now that we've studied it, okay? Well, I'm going to stop sharing now and just get your comments as we conclude here. Anybody? Just a second. Go ahead, Ruth.
Well, I can think of a couple of things that are, with touchy-feely, like if somebody goes to Philadelphia and sees the Liberty Bell, nobody has a compunction to touch the Liberty Bell. Like there's nothing special about touching the Liberty Bell. But if you go to the coattail, everybody wants to touch the coattail. I don't know what gets transferred there, but like everybody has to push forward so they can touch the coattail. Okay. And then the other thing, which is like just like people play air guitar or air drums, like the Kohanim, I mean, to this day, when they give the blessing, they're not actually touching anybody, but it's like playing air guitar, like something's happening. I don't know what it is.
In both of those instances, your first instance, which was the
coattail,
Liberty Bell,
and the Liberty Bell. What is it about us? Okay, look, we're tactile people. I mean, haven't we learned, over the last year how desperate we are for human touch, right? And what is signified by touch? Well, I characteristically, I would say, in a religious sense, I've taken a very narrow meaning to this, which is saying, touch, this is a formal legal designation as opposed to the affective, emotional, connectedness of me to it. You go to the wall and touch the wall, I think out of mystery and history and a sense of, proximity and truly a sense of awe. Here we, my own experiences, I'm sure you share these experiences, which is like, here we are, we're Jews, we're alive, we're 2,000 years after this was built, and we're still here. To me, that moment, that's what's in the, look, and part, I'm like, and it's limestone. and look at that. And gee, and I summoned my father, what do you think how do you think they took the stones here? How do you think they lifted this? I mean, it's an engineering marvel. I mean, I don't care what anybody says. The Herodian ruins around of the temple are simply magnificent and spellbinding in terms of the engineering mastery that was necessary. So, I don't have that mystical experience by touching the wall, okay? And the Kohanim, yeah. So the question becomes, at what point does religion kind of stumble into magic? It's not an accident that you would think that, or anyone would think that all religions come right up and sometimes go right over the boundary. And Judaism, you won't be surprised to hear this, has many books on this. Bob.
Yeah, I wanted to just several comments. One is, I'm intrigued by your mentioning that children are often first introduced to this part. Yes. And I'm wondering to what degree, rather than one interpretation being correct, that maybe all of the interpretations have a place in a developmental way, because this analysis of ownership is a very adult concept, and children and others, particularly the early Israelites, they are going to be moving away. So could this be a developmental approach of how does one connect, how does one get closeness? And just three other quick comments. In the text, Vayikra and Vayikar, I was reading that there's a small aleph that appears to talk about humility being a part of this. And so how does one approach this with the appropriate humility to connect? And so the touching piece, which is something we increasingly used to teach the medical students, which is saying we've lost touch during doctor-patient relationships. People just look at lab tests, x-rays, but they don't connect. So there can be a real healing part to the touch part, whether individually or collectively. And the final thing I just wanted to say is, with the pleasing odor piece, isn't it also just about the doing and the intent, and not just the fact of touching hands, as happened with Susanna? So that the pleasing odor is at least some of the Hasidic views on that.
Let me try and rattle off some answers. First of all, the first question was, is it developmental? So here I'm going to take a very a kind of dogmatic view on this and say that this is not child's religion here. This is adult religion here. The role of sacrifice and being around knives and blood and death is not something for children, and it's fairly clear that's what's going on here. And I think again, to reiterate, the Bible's strong aversion to magic and magical thinking puts those ideas to the side. In terms of Vayikra, and humility, absolutely, and that theme is built on in many Pirushim and lots of interpretations. And in terms of the other issue, which was, remind me again, just a second.
The connection, pleasing odor, intent, doing.
Right. Intention certainly matters. And the language of this, again, goes back to that archaism. Okay. Go ahead, Ilana.
It's easier to explain it in Hebrew. The connection between the samach and korban both mean to get close. קורבן זה from also להתקרב, להיות קרוב, not just the physical sacrifice, but maybe the spiritual connection to be close to God by sacrificing through the physical action. So when you do the somech, also somech noflim,
Yes.
could also be an example that there is to make a close connection between us and God by doing different actions. And what is the one? I want to say one more. Okay.
What I want to say is that we when we use that language of the closeness, we have to Judaism is built around us a strong brick wall against physicalizing God, and maybe that's also part of the kotel issues that people think that they may be touching God, as it were, touching something divine, and touching the holy and touching God and they're all different things. But once you get into that zone, it becomes a very gray zone, I understand the pull because it's mystery. It fulfills a deep part of what it means to be a human being, which is to be humble and to not know anything, to remember that you think you know stuff and you really know zero. That's part of being a human being.
I just wanted to say, when it says v'samach yado al ha'olah, maybe it is to say, I'm so sorry that I have to do it to you.
I don't think so.
No?
Sorry. I don't think so.
I would feel very guilty doing that.
Of course you would. Of course you would, because you live today and you don't live around animals, and you buy your meat in a foam plate with cellophane, right? People who live close to animals love their animals, and they also understand, and I've seen this in the cooking shows and Chef's Table, whatever. They say you've been placed on this earth for my food, and I'm thankful to you. I'm sorry that I have to do this to you, but I'm we're going to have such a beautiful feast because of you, and you have given us so much, and we have raised you with love and with tenderness and giving you, that's a real farmer, so not a factory farmer, they don't really have any concern, but animals who lived in a close way with their, people who live close to their animals have a great sense of reverence, and they say the animal is here for my food, and I am deeply humbled by it. And there, of course, there is a tendency among people to be squeamish and to feel a sense of revulsion. You can't look at these things without feeling, gross. And I don't want to say this, but you've all heard it from one place or another, that if you had to go to an abattoir or a slaughterhouse where animals were slaughtered, it's not that you would become vegetarian tomorrow, but it's like, maybe I'll pass. I don't like the following day, you're probably not going to have a steak. It's gruesome, but it's gruesome because it's not part of our lives. But if we lived in a rural setting, if we lived around animals, if we, it took, like my grandmother, you took the chicken to the shochet and you gave them a couple of quarters or a quarter, and they shechted in front of you. And they were tough ladies, those ladies. They never mind the shechita, they pulled the thing apart, they, salted inside, because you want to eat. That's what you got to do. You got to eat. And they understood that we are, we're squeamish vegetarians, we can't handle it. We can't handle the truth.
I remember they used to buy a fish. And
a fish also.
In a bathtub and alive, and then the following day
they smack it on the head. Yeah, you have to be a tough tough lady to do that. All right, go ahead, Gatel.